All right, our presentation is on comparing experiences of caring for loved ones at the end of life. Presenters are Riley, Sarah, Hannah, myself, and Sasha. So a quick introduction of what we did. Our focus groups were with 3 families and their experiences with end-of-life care. One family was ruminating on past experiences. Another is someone is currently in hospice care. And then the final was an individual in hospice care in another country.
So the first case actually followed my family. My grandmother had fallen at home. She ended up in the nursing home, and my mother was pretty much the primary caregiver. So after she had fallen, the doctor stated that she needed 24-hour care because if she was living at home by herself, she wasn't considered safe anymore. So there were the options of home health, living with my family, or going into a nursing home. And unfortunately, home health was going to be too expensive. There was no way that my grandmother was going to come live with my family. She wanted to stay in her own town. So we kind of got forced into putting her in a nursing home. But the nice thing, and something that kind of makes this an ideal case, is that the doctor took care of everything once this decision was made. So he took care of the arrangements to get her there and took care of making sure that they knew everything that she needed. My mother, Misty, was the power of attorney pretty much because she knew how her mother liked things. She was going to get things done. And it was a lot less stressful on her once the doctor kind of made the decision and took care of everything. That was a big load off of her shoulders. And although my grandmother didn't like the nursing home, she did enjoy the social aspects of it, as opposed to being home alone, because there were nurses to talk to, there was a therapy dog, there was a salon, which she loved because she loved having her hair done and her nails done. And the healthcare staff also always checked in with my mother if a decision was being made, because she was the power of attorney, she was the best contact, and that also lifted a great deal of stress off her shoulders because she always knew that there wasn't going to be anything done under the table. Everything was going to go through her. So the overarching theme that we found with my family's case was that there's a lot of stress when you're a decision maker for a loved one, and a lot of that stress comes from worrying about how it could affect your loved one. So it was very stressful, just considering that my grandmother did not want to be in the nursing home, and she voiced this often, pretty much to anyone who would listen. And it was very stressful for my mom because she felt that she couldn't take care of her own mother. She lived 6 hours away, so she was always kind of worrying about her from a distance. She knew that she wasn't going to get a lot of help from her siblings, except for one brother who lived in town, who was very helpful. And then there was the stress of progressing dementia, because that affected my grandmother's lucidity. It really was a problem when they were trying to initially make these legal decisions to grant power of attorney and make sure everything was ready for the house in case it had to be sold, and bringing all that together. And it was also stressful in an emotional sense because a loved one not recognizing you is incredibly emotional. It's very saddening, and that just kind of adds to the overall picture.
So some of the research that we were looking into this was the transitions into going into assisted living, because you're going from being independent to, essentially having someone take partial care of you or complete care of you. So some of the research in a qualitative study had noticed that there were 3 different types of acceptance that were possible. So positive acceptance, where you just, ultimately say, all right, I understand where I'm going. Resigned, kind of where you just go, and then passively, it's kind of just accepted. You just maybe not say anything about it. But ultimately, from this article, regardless of the time that it takes, it's important for us to not be ignorant to our parents' autonomy so that we can help ease this transition.
So this next part is following my family. My grandmother is 82 and she's currently in hospice care due to multiple illnesses and comorbidities going on. My mom is doing a lot of the caretaking, and so my mom and dad are actually living with my grandmother in Missouri, though they have their own house in North Carolina. So there's a little bit of stress there, and on top of taking care of a loved one. And my aunt and uncle also live in town. However, they both have jobs and they have their own house so they don't live with my grandmother either. So they're there to help, but they're not there all the time. So my mom has really been in charge of coordinating home health, getting grandma taken care of and situated and happy and comfortable. So there's been a lot of like stressors involved with that. And grandma's not been the most cooperative patient. So that definitely doesn't help. And it's not that she doesn't want to get better, is that she doesn't quite understand why she needs to take medications and why she has to get up and move around and things like that. And it's been especially difficult right now during the pandemic, trying to get home health aides on a consistent care basis. So there's a lot of things going on. So then there's needs to deal with stress, and ways of doing that, including exercise. And my aunt and uncle both go to work, so they get some time away. Mom goes and runs errands, and taking control wherever it's possible has really been the way they have been handling all of the things coming at them at once.
So what's important when you're going through this type of transition is how you handle your stress, whether it's, your family member who's ill, who's having the stress and they're not handling it well, or whether you personally are not handling it well. Wanted to look into see what different kinds of coping mechanisms were available for caregivers and how they can handle their stress. And this qualitative study had mentioned that there are multiple avenues that people can take when caring for their loved ones, including self-care, whether it's getting a pedicure or manicure, having assistance, maybe your, a sibling or a relative can come over and help you occasionally. They also suggested that moving in with the family member to give 24-hour service sometimes is the best option depending on the situation. One case had mentioned that she had completely dismissed all of her emotions and essentially went to work. She just focused in on what she had to do. And then another person had mentioned that practicing religion was very helpful, that it was able to get her through the day and allow her to continue caring for her loved one.
So our third case is about my stepmom's dad. He was in his 80s when he was diagnosed with dementia and passed away a few years ago. Before he went into assisted living, he was living independently in a small town in rural British Columbia, Canada, with my grandma, who was a few years younger than him. And essentially, they were going to their physician regularly, but in Canada, they have a socialized healthcare system, which meant that they only had 10 or 15-minute appointments with their physician. So they really weren't able to catch, the doctors weren't able to catch the worsening Alzheimer's symptoms before it got really bad. And my grandparents were able to not mention his, roaming around the town. He drove a scooter into a pond and almost fell in. And this pretty much meant that their 3 adult children had to evict them from their trailer and put him into an assisted living. And this was really hard on him. My stepmom said it really well when she said going into assisted living was a sign to Dad that this was it. He was no longer Bob. He was an old man in assisted living. And going into this facility really was a loss of identity for him. It was the signal that that this was the final chapter. And I think even though he did have dementia and was no longer as lucid as he used to be, he was definitely aware of this grief and this loss that was coming. And his wife, my grandmother, was also aware of this transition. And eventually she stopped going to see him because it was too hard to see him in a worsening health condition. The good news of their experience is that the socialized healthcare system in Canada covered all of the financial and physical needs that they had. They paid for the assisted living, they paid for all of the medication and rehabilitation equipment. So none of that had to come out of my family's pockets. And they also provided round-the-clock caregiving and, taking care of the more involved tasks of bathing and dressing and toileting. So my family was not burdened by all of those really involved tasks. And that really relieved them of an emotional exhaustion that so many families have. And my stepmom said that she really did feel that the Canadian healthcare system allowed them to preserve their dad in their memories as the person he really was. So I mention this because this helped them to grieve as, along the way and not be wrapped up in the physical care that he needed. So fortunately, a few years before he started declining, they actually, my grandparents watched some 20/20 episode on DNRs, and they both, got one in place, and which my stepmom was very supportive of. They did not have an advance directive or living will of any way, and my stepmom said that she feels very adamant that it's the responsibility of the parent to have that for their children. And that prompted us to have a conversation about the 5 wishes advance directive, and she was very receptive to making that for her and my dad. For our family, the power of attorney was pretty easy because they're in a small town, everybody knew them, and we're also, a pretty close family, so there's no real disputes about, the type of care. That definitely could be a more complicated issue in an estranged family.
So with a collection of literature that I was looking up, the one takeaway that I really got from this was that no matter how much preparation is done ahead of time, or even amount of support that one can receive from the government, especially with socialized healthcare, the family still at minimum is responsible for financial or general medical monitoring. There's some sort of involvement with that family regardless. So of course they're going to feel that kind of stress and obligation. But with the socialized healthcare, in Sarah's family's case, it was able to be a bit more of a smoother transition. It overall still takes emotional, financial, mental, and general support to aid in this transition into any kind of assisted living that anyone is going to be going through.
So how do we relate all of this to physical therapy? So patient family education, you can discuss treatment plans, the what and the why, to reduce stress and to make the unknown seem more known. So the patient and the family can see the clear reasoning behind what you want to focus on. You can also speak with the patient about their specific goals and what they like to do in order to make them feel as though they are part of the process and that they can also enjoy it. Also, working in an environment like nursing homes or hospice care will probably become increasingly more important as the baby boomers continue to get older. So as we go out into the PT world, more and more of our patients will be elderly. Also, nursing homes tend to have a bad rep as a place where most PTs do not want to work. So how can we as a profession change that bias? And then finally, with patient advocacy, we can fight for the patients to receive better care when in the nursing home or hospice. You can look at different healthcare systems and learn what can be implemented into your treatment or plan of care, and also help the patient be heard by other healthcare professionals and their families to ensure that everyone has a say in what's going on, and also that everyone can also understand the role of PT and how we can help the patients through this process.
So in conclusion of our presentation, a couple of takeaways is that this is a multifaceted approach in making a transition as smooth as possible. So, as early as you can, if need be, talk to your parents, try not to avoid it. Maybe if you can make these arrangements ahead of time before signs become noticeable or if they're minimal. And then be obviously considerate of your parents' wishes and autonomy. They're still people. They still have their own needs and desires as well. Some things to consider: do they have a last will and testament? Do they have a power of attorney set up? Any of this paperwork that they have taken care of ahead of time. Also, this is a multi-interdisciplinary team. Is usually best to help allow for maximized care. So nurses, doctors, PTs, other therapists, social workers, people that work in the assisted living facilities, family members, of course, even lawyers. This whole team is crucial in having an open communication and open dialogue and making sure that their loved one is going to be taken care of. And also to be aware of the coping skills. And ultimately it comes down to learning what works best for you. Again, it can be a matter of talking to someone, having help, whether it's from a family member or a friend, exercising, creating to-do lists so you keep yourself busy, meditating or practicing religion. Again, same thing. It's a matter of understanding you and how you can help yourself in taking care of your loved one. And then also, ultimately, just remember why you're doing this. You just want to make sure that your parents are as comfortable as possible as they continue to age and potentially as things become more difficult. You want to be able to keep their stresses low, but also be respectful of their autonomy still that they're trying to maintain if they are. And also, just bear in mind of what's practical and what's feasible and what's the most feasible approach for you and them. And then these are our references here. Thank you so much.